This video is in continuation with the last video of the end of bipolarity. We have already studied so far the bipolar world of 1945 gives way to a unipolar world of 1991 where the other pole represented by the USSR has disintegrated. That meaning the communist system has come to an end. We have already studied the consequences of this disintegration brought about the end of the Cold War confrontation, meaning there is no other ideology left, so there are no ideological disputes, no tensions. There is the end of the arms race now because the other pole has almost disintegrated in terms of economy, in terms of politics, in terms of cultural life, in terms of social life. There then is some possibility of peace, or rather more of civil wars coming in rather than the other aspect of a peaceful world. Power relations in the world now change. We have already studied the balance of power theory where one power balances the other. Now that the other power is no more, the world is now unipolar, that is represented by the US or the capitalist world. It has given way to two new organizations, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which will now dictate the economy of the world. That meaning from the arms race we move on now to a race where economy shall dictate the hegemony of one. We have new countries emerging from the disintegration of the USSR, specifically Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. We have another organization called the Commonwealth of Independent Nations, represented by Russia as the bigger power and collectively by the Central Asian countries of the former USSR. The end of the Soviet Union meant Gorbachev resigns, Boris Yeltsin comes in as the new president of now Russia, which takes over the UN place of a permanent seat which was earlier represented by the USSR. What is left of Russia is now a more liberalized, a more stabilized, a more privatized economy which has no control over the social sector of the society. Match the first map with the second one and find out the number of countries that have become independent, countries that are now part of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Alright, the change now comes over through a process that is called as shock therapy. Why shock? Because it was a sudden transition that took place without consulting the locals of the place where the shift was to take place. Therapy because it was supposed to cure the ill effects of the erstwhile USSR. The economic reason was one of those reasons why USSR disintegrated, and hence the economy had to be rebuilt. The political system, which was communist in nature, had to be made democratic. All these changes were to take place through a model of transition in these areas, specifically Russia, Central Asia and East Europe, that were to be influenced by World Bank and IMF. Keep this in mind that these two institutes are also a part of US. This is called as a shock therapy. In all the Central Asian republics that were now formed, the change or transition varied in speed and intensity. The shift, though, in all these areas was towards a capitalist economy where private ownership was given importance, where the collective system was now towards an end, where foreign institutional investments and foreign direct investments were taking place, where currency could be converted, where deregulation was introduced, and the earlier trade alliances now broke up. What we need to say is that a new class of entrepreneurs, black marketeers, are coming into place. We have the mafia system that will now take place. We have a liberalized pricing system, a central bank which was short of revenue and hence more of indebtedness in the new Russia. There is also a new constitution which takes place in 1993 with a presidential form of government, two houses. You have a bicameral legislature. That meaning we also see of all these changes that are taking place, there are certain results that need to be noted. Consequences of shock therapy. All the new industries that are now given into private hands are sold. Sold how? Sold like a garage sale where the best prices were not sought. They were all sold at undervalued prices This resulted in losses not only to the government that was newly formed, because the amount of money received by the government was not the same that it expected. This resulted in the decline in the value of the ruble, that is the currency of the new Russia. There were high rate of inflation, food prices soared because there was little food security available. The collective farms that disintegrated naturally went into private hands only to those who were rich enough to buy them. There was no alternate structure in place, and hence the country's GDP, or the income of the country, fell. Because the government is no longer communist, the welfare policies that it had introduced had suddenly given away. This resulted in also the growth of mafia, or the corruption houses in Russia, who took over the economy of the country also. Besides, politically, all the new nations that were formed or were a part of the CIS also saw a series of tensions, specifically in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, where the new presidents were authoritarian. No opposition was permitted, and the judiciary was still not in place, where people could ask for more justice for themselves. What we also see is the GDP fell, and hence the capacity of Russia to bargain in international economic structures or in economic conversations that took place declined. Privatization led to disparities within the new Russia that was formed. The rich and the poor gap increased. Naturally so, the poor were in a helpless situation where there was no food security. Academicians in search of new jobs or a more peaceful place migrated to other nations, and hence a decline in the intellectual manpower of Russia. There was the growth of civil wars and insurgencies. Specifically, you could see in Chechnya and Dagestan, there are violent secessionist movements. Secession means they are trying to move out of the new Commonwealth of Independent States. There is civil war in Tajikistan. A small part of Azerbaijan, where the Armenians reside, now want to join Armenia. There are civil wars in Georgia besides river water disputes. The moment areas found that they had uranium or oil resources and could sustain an independent livelihood, they now wanted more bargain in the resources, and hence there was a sense of competition there. The erstwhile Russia USSR areas were now called as the near abroad areas. Now the new Russia wanted them to be a part of the CIS. Similarly, the world over, we also find the former communist areas of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia moving into splits, Czechoslovakia into 2 and Yugoslavia into 6 parts. What we need to understand is, what was the relationship between India and Russia? India and Russia have always been close together, courtesy Nehru, who himself was socialist. Nevertheless, because we were a part of the non-aligned movement, we never decided to join any of the power groups. Nevertheless, we had cultural associations where we were visited by artists from either side and performers. Raj Kapoor was very famous in USSR, and so was the cultural content and the books available in India, which were Russian in concepts. Nevertheless, over a period of time, by 1970s, the world structure changed, and it was compulsory that India enter into bilateral agreements with former USSR, and this was continued when the new Russia was formed. There have been Indo-USSR relations in economic terms. We had huge partnerships and investments by the Russian companies into India, specifically in the steel plants of Bhilai and also in the oil manufacturing areas or oil digging areas of Visakhapatnam. Energy supplies. Later on, even from oil to cryogenics was the courtesy of USSR. Most important, when India had no foreign currency assets, Russia agreed to accept payments in the Indian currency. Nevertheless, good economic partnerships and investment continued. In political sector, after 1969 and 1970, when we signed a 20-year treaty with Russia, we got a moral support as well as diplomatic support on the issue of Kashmir. India also reciprocated by not discussing Hungary and Czechoslovakia, where the USSR was trying to interfere and engage during the Cold War era. Military areas, hardware production, arms market was provided by India. We also had joint military exercises taking place between USSR and India, which today, as you know, is more common with the US. Cultural exchanges, bilateral artists, tourists take place between the two countries. Diplomatically, we have always sided with each other, and both after 1991 supported a multipolar world. While the US insisted on the era being concentrated as a unipolar world, India and Russia supported a multipolar world where regional organization would be given more importance, where the idea of collective security was important, where regional political groups would try to influence or counter US hegemony and make it more a more balancing of power taking place then. Negotiated settlement of conflicts also took place. Also in the UN, India has been supporting USSR over most of the issues. Lately, terrorism is the newfound problem that is being discussed, where both the countries are busy discussing each other on how to control and counter terrorism through collective measures. What we need to understand is the world scenario has changed over a period of time. The Cold War has ended, and the new issues that come up are globalization, etc. Global warming are the new issues. Terrorism is what we need to discuss. Militancy in Kashmir has always been in focus in the last few decades that we see. The old friendships continue despite the end of the Cold War. Of late, the Putin government has been in alliance with India and has been in good terms. Rearmament by Russia is bringing it to be a new superpower, to its new superpower status. Let's see if the old hegemony world continues. Thank you.